I'm not a very old person, mid 40s now. I remember uh, lots of people that had served in the military in Europe in World War II. And I remember in the early 90s meeting someone who said that they served in World War I in Europe and had come across to California by a wagon train in the late 1800s. I guess the math works out for that, but I have no way to verify that. My wife's uncle was a prisoner of war in World War II. Yes, quite a bit older than me. Um, Never thought I would see the day that there would be the kind of conflict in Europe that there is today between Russia and Ukraine, with Russia's um, just invasion and war. As a young man, I enjoyed history, and I would often ask myself, how could Hitler rise to power? How could people allow that to happen? As a Christian, how could many in the church sit by as that happened, and the atrocities and the genocide against the Jewish people? And I never really came to a great conclusion on that. I certainly have my opinions, as everyone does, and it's easier to share our opinions with those that agree with us. Um, but the other day, I was talking to someone, and um, I just kind of was baffled. They were saying how what's happening in Ukraine isn't what we might get from the news, especially the mainstream news, and that Russia is only attacking military targets and um, uh, labs that are funded by the West and by the central banks and by the deep state, kind of like the lab in Wuhan, and that Russia is one of the few countries to stand up against the central bank and the deep state, and the areas that have been attacked in the last few years, like Afghanistan and Iraq and places like that, were taking a stand against the deep state. And I knew that this information is out there. I've watched podcasts and I've read articles, and I've certainly seen what happened with the QAnon people during January 6th of 2021 with the sedition and coup of, not necessarily coup, but people that supported Donald Trump, thinking that he somehow won the election that he lost, and it's been verified multiple times. And it just stumped me that this person that I know had deeply held these beliefs and these opinions. And it made me think back to those times as a young man, wondering how someone like Hitler could come to power, and the excuses that must have been made among the German people and the allies that were supporting him, people in other countries that were supportive. There had to have been excuses. There had to have been um, that the rest of the world was bad, and this is good, and this is righteous, and this is right. And that, yeah, war's never good, fighting's never good, but it's being done for a good cause. It's being done for the right reasons, and it just made me really think about that. And certainly, there's always more to any story than we could ever gather. There's a lot more than whether mainstream news or right wing news or left wing news or um, uh, obscure news or whatever would report. Um, with today's technology, it's very easy to manipulate photos and videos. Unless you're checking the metadata or you know people that are in a certain area, it can be difficult to know and to trust what you're seeing. And I do happen to know people that have fled in Ukraine, and what they are saying is more consistent with what the mainstream media is saying than some of these other fringe sites. And, I think it's important that as a Christian, we choose this day who we are going to serve. As Joshua said, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord and do what is right. And there's never a wrong time to do what is right and not be so worried about reasons why or whatnot. And the Bible says that God appoints rulers and authorities, and He builds up and He takes down. And those are hard things to understand. And yeah, He can use terrible people to bring about change in people's lives and bring about change in nations and along the earth. But often it's done by the evil of people's hearts. And I think Putin is moving in evil ways. Does that mean that the United States has always been perfect and guiltless? No, we've made mistakes. Everybody's going to make mistakes. Every government's going to make mistakes. They're going to do things that are based on their own agenda and their own purposes. But I trust what I know of the United States government more than I trust of communist governments or socialist governments or governments that aren't free. And seeing what's happening in Ukraine and some of the live videos that I've seen of people running for their lives, it's horrible. And I can't imagine. And I hope there's never a day where that happens here, where we have to pack up. And one girl that I watched a video of, she got to a bomb shelter and she just had her on her own underwear and a change of clothes and nothing else. And I can't imagine that, a week like that, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, however long this will go on, months maybe. Insurgencies, destruction, death, persecution. The sudden change that happens in these times when a city falls and new leadership comes in, and the fear. And then what? Does this stop at Ukraine? Does this go into other countries? Growing up, there was always worries about World War III and nuclear holocaust. I remember, watching the movie Day After a few times about what happens the day after Russia and the United States launch nukes. And, those were frightful times and frightful movies during the Cold War. And to think that we could go back to that, where there's this constant gripped by fear between the East and the West, and who's right and who's wrong, and who's evil and who's good. And just, again, I think to see what Putin is doing, cracking down on dissidents in his own country, people that say that it's a war and not a military operation, people that are protesting it, getting arrested. That's not right. And people in our own country supporting someone like Putin, who has unlawfully gone into another country and attacked it. And did we go into Iraq and Afghanistan unlawfully? Well, there's a whole nother history lesson in that. After 9/11 and harboring of terrorists and things like that. Again, I don't know all the details. I'm not part of the government. But I just would caution anybody that sees this just to think more deeply about whether it's a Republican that we support, a Democrat that we support, or a foreign dictator. Would we be guilty? Would we be culpable of the rise of a man like Hitler? And be honest with ourselves about that.